We don't need to understand chemistry or brain anatomy in order to understand neurotic suffering. What we need to understand is logic and how logic works. It's easy for us to think that it must be a matter of brain chemistry, or it must be a matter of something going wrong with our brain in some way, a fault in the brain, or a fault in our learning. But in actual fact, the fault lies in logic itself, which is the one place we'd never look for a fault. We take it for granted that logic or rationality is in itself perfect without all faults. And so if there is a fault, it must be something else. It can't be logic. So obviously, if it were to be the case that there is a fault in logic, we'd miss it. We'd miss it every time, and we'd blame everything else instead. We'd blame all the wrong things. We'd blame ourselves. We'd blame the government. We'd blame society. We'd blame whatever. But the fault is in logic. This isn't a new idea that there is a fault inherent in every logical structure, every logical statement. It's well known, if you happen to be familiar with cybernetics, for example, or certain branches of philosophy. But the problem is that when we specialize in psychology or mental health, we don't have any time or any incentive to study other things, and so we miss this. And certainly in everything we're taught in the psychological fields, we're never taught that there's a fault in logic. We're not taught it because as psychologists or psychotherapists, we don't know that. Wouldn't that be a great thing to know, though? And it has been known for a long time. So Michel de Montaigne, that would have been about 300 years ago, or something like that, says that when we believe something, we also disbelieve it at the same time. And he says that he finds this kind of peculiar, that we can't believe in something without also disbelieving in it at the same time. It is peculiar. So Michel de Montaigne noticed it. Good man. He noticed something interesting there. The rest of us don't seem to notice it. Maybe, I don't know what we're doing. We're thinking about something else. We're preoccupied, maybe. But this is a very easy thing to understand. Supposing I were to go around saying that God exists, God is real, there is a God, and being very, very definite and very, very assertive like that. So what am I saying? In one way, you could say, but you're saying that God is real, God exists, there is a God, and that's the explicit message. But obviously the implicit message is doubt. The only reason I would say I would need to state that God exists if it weren't for the thought that I have also had that maybe God doesn't exist. So I have the thought maybe God doesn't exist, there is no God. And I think about that and I say, no, there is a God. But actually there isn't a God and there is a God is the same thought. It's the same thing. One way we assert the negative, one way we assert the positive, but it's the same either way. So, to believe in God is to disbelieve in him. Now, I'm not being I'm not trying to promote atheism. Atheism is to say God doesn't exist. So that's the same as saying God does exist. We're still hung up on this kind of a thing. Supposing there was no doubt, and that what we could call God, or what we could call whatever else we wanted to, wasn't an issue, then I wouldn't have to say that God exists. And it wouldn't occur to me that, oh, he doesn't exist, because it wouldn't be an issue. So in that case, no statements would be needed. But whenever logic comes out and makes a positive statement, it also makes the reverse statement at the same time. And James Cass calls this the self-contradictoriness of finite play. And we can chase it back to that to the liar paradox. The liar paradox being where I say everything I say is a lie. What the liar paradox shows is that actually we cannot contain reality within the framework of our thoughts, because when we try and do that, we might contain something, but we'll contain its antithesis at the same time. So really we're containing nothing. So we can never point at reality. We can never say it is this. Here it is, I found it, it's here. Here's the answer, here's the solution. We can never do that, because absolutely everything thought points at, the act of pointing is one half of a double act. So I'm explicitly pointing at the positive assertion whilst covering over the negative assertion that goes with it. There's no such thing as a positive assertion on its own. There's no such thing as a unipolar assertion. This, if we can see the problem or the snag where it is, we'll stop building on thought so much. And if we don't see it, we'll build all sorts of things with thought. We'll create everything with thought. We'll create a world out of thought, and we'll create an identity out of thought. And then in that world, in that identity, there will be counterproductivity. Stuff will be working against us the whole time. So in terms of the identity, I could say that I try to benefit myself, but at the same time that I am experiencing this positive desire to be healthy and do good stuff and do healthy stuff, there is the equal and opposite impulse of sabotaging myself, tripping myself up. And you can't ever separate the two. We might think that we can separate the two because we can charge ahead on the positive phase and think we're getting somewhere. But then when the time comes, it'll all flip over and I'll go negative. So in other words, there's no purposeful way to strive for anything without also striving for the opposite. So to take this on board would be a really, really big thing. We'd have to question everything, really, because, as I was saying, our entire world is made out of thought. And that, I mean, that's obviously that was always been true, as the Buddha is said to have mentioned that everything you are is the result of what you have thought. So in that sense, yes, everything is made up of thought. But these days, we're more rigorous, and we've dismissed all the other stuff apart from thought, and we put thought on a huge pedestal. And it's like the God machine, that logic or rational thought is going to save us. But it'll only save us to the extent that it screws us up. Nothing fails like success, says Alan Watts. So that's what happens when we dip into a bit of philosophy, or with Michel de Montaigne, you could say, I don't know, mysticism or spirituality or philosophy. Basically, the guy was just pondering upon stuff and looking at stuff seriously and not listening to the bullshit everyone else is always saying. When we do listen to what everyone else says, then there's no chance of us ever becoming wise. And that's the one thing we don't want to do. We don't want to think for ourselves. And if we do, which we do anyway, every now and again, we'll feel far too ashamed, really, to say what we think if it's out of step with everyone else, because we might be belittled for it. Maybe we won't be belittled for it. We'll just be ignored instead. And that's the way society works. If you are singing from the same hymn sheet as everyone else, then you get listened to. If you're not, then you won't be granted status enough to have a voice, which is a very funny situation, really. So when you agree with everyone else, all of a sudden everyone's going to listen to you. But what's the point? Because they're only agreeing with you in the first place. It's like me saying, I'm only going to listen to people who say what I want them to say. They're the truth. They're the truth speakers. Everyone else, they're rotten, dirty liars. So this is really just a mechanism, a very crude mechanism, that we put people in a position of authority only when we know they're safe, only when we know they're going to sing from the same hymn sheet and not going to upset the boat. So what this means that what it means is that it's very hard to change things. It's very hard to get new ideas across. It's hard, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try, I suppose. Keep on throwing them out there, because eventually, every now and again, the idea might connect with someone else and it might go on. Something might come of it. So in neurosis, to come back to the point, what we're essentially doing is we are trying to do something impossible, but we don't know that it's impossible, so we keep on doing it. And not only do we keep on doing it, we keep on trying harder and harder, because our response to the fact that it's not working out for us isn't to give it up and say, this is a paradox, this is a self-contradiction, it's a self-contradicting situation, which would take insight. So in the absence of insight, what we always do is push harder. The damn thing isn't working, try harder. I'm running in the wheel really fast, but I'm not getting anywhere. What do? Run faster. It's the obvious answer, and that's what we do. So the thinking mind is like the little hamster wheel, and for the most part, we go through our lives without ever seeing the self-contradictoriness of finite play. We go through our whole lives without seeing the flaw or the systematic error that is in thought. But the more we push it, i.e. the faster we run on the wheel that is created by our thinking, the more this self-contradiction becomes apparent. So the reason we would push it and run faster in the wheel of our thoughts is because of fear. So every now and again we get desperate and we have to try extra hard, and we really do push it. So for example, I could be really, really desperate to attain something, achieve something, and I try a lot harder than everyone else, and then the paradoxicality becomes more obvious. Or I could be trying to run away from something, and I try very, very, very hard, and because I'm pushing it to the limits, I start to see that the more I run away from something, the more it chases me, the closer it gets, the more heavily it breathes down my neck. And then the flip side of that is the more I chase something, the more it gets away from me. But both chasing something that I want and fleeing something that I don't want are the same thing. In both cases, I'm trying to obtain the advantageous outcome and avoid the disadvantageous one. So that's the essential polarity that is in all purposeful effort, in all striving. How could there be such a thing as purposeful effort without the two poles of what I want and what I don't want? So no matter what situation we are, it's always this polar situation of want, don't want, win, lose, succeed, fail. And as I was saying, we all operate like that, and we don't really notice anything contradictory about it until we try really, really, really hard. And then it becomes painfully obvious because our trying backfires on us and causes us actual pain. So if I'm trying very hard to avoid some conscious content, that will bring the paradoxicality of finite play into my field of vision. I'll be able to see it. I'll be able to suffer from it firsthand. And the other side in neurosis might be where I want to obtain the correct outcome. So, for example, I might suffer from OCD, and I want to be sure, 100% sure, of attaining the right outcome, of things being the way that they have to be. I'm trying to follow the rules, basically. Now, we all follow rules in a kind of a slightly slapdash kind of a way, but if ever we get ourselves in a situation where we absolutely have to follow the rule, that's when the paradoxicality of logic rebounds on us big time. So an example of that would be perfectionism as well. When I try to get everything perfect, I get totally stuck. And this is a suffering-producing thing, because the more I tune in, the smaller and smaller the picture I'm looking at becomes, the more compulsive it becomes. So when our minds are narrow, our minds are compulsive. They're driven by external mechanical forces. In other words, all insight is lost, and all I can know is that one outcome, one pole, is infinitely desirable and the other pole is infinitely undesirable. So I'm caught in this straining situation, and the strain has got nothing to do with reality. I have created that polarity myself by relying 100% on thinking when I shouldn't. In order not to be caught in this, I would need to have awareness that there is something outside thinking, and that thinking is only provisionally true, instead of absolutizing thinking and making it absolutely the be-all and the end-all. So in perfectionism, it becomes more and more important that things should be perfect, and the more I try and focus on this, the more blinkered I become, and the more important it becomes, and the more important it becomes, and the more I try to obtain it, the more I find myself facing the other pole, the unwanted outcome. So that is suffering. And we can see that the more perspective we lose in such a situation, the more compulsive it gets, i.e. the more important it is to win rather than lose, and therefore the more we strain, and therefore the more we strain, the more I'm terrified by losing. So we can see that this is a suffering-producing situation that just gets worse and worse the more I try and get myself out of it. It tightens. It tightens and it tightens, just like a finger trap. The more I pull my finger, the more the trap digs into my flesh. So it's always the case with this kind of thing, like finger traps, that we have insight rather than strength. I might be really strong and really determined and just end up ripping my finger off or my arm off. It wouldn't be good anyway. Whereas if I stop and take an all-round picture, a bigger view of things rather than a narrow compulsive view, I will understand the nature of the finger trap, and I will not do the thing that makes the finger trap work. And I'll just be able to walk away, not by doing, but by not doing, which is again an illustration of the way in which our incomprehension of not doing, our naive incomprehension of what not knowing means, leads us in a situation where we're never going to appreciate what's helpful in the case of neurosis. We've always got methods to do this and methods to do that, and all methods, without exception, and there really isn't any exception, equal trying to pull your finger out of the finger trap. Well, what would be the point of a method if we weren't trying to attain something? So it kind of, I know I'm kind of saying the obvious over and over again, but it is obvious, I know, but at the same time we don't see it at all. So any type of methodology, any type of strategy creates polarity. It creates the polarity of the wanted outcome versus the unwanted outcome. And that is what traps us. That is the finger trap right there. So the thing that helps us in neurosis is consciousness. And yet at the same time, the more we throw ourselves into the neurotic activity, the less conscious we become. And the reason we become less conscious is because the task is so demanding, it eats up all of our attention. We're caught up in it completely. We're totally in a state of total attachment, total engagement, we're totally sucked up in the struggle, and there's nothing left over. So that's unconsciousness. So if we wanted to be free, well, obviously we do want to be free, but if realistically we were to stand a chance of being free, we'd have to go against this pure mechanical compulsivity so that we don't just enact it, so that we're not just a puppet of the compulsive forces that's making the wheel turn around and around. We'd actually, instead of just allowing our slice of attention, like a little thin slice of a pizza, getting narrower and narrower and narrower, we'd have to find the way for it to widen again, because when it widens, that's the only time we actually see anything resembling the truth, and it's also the only time we become free from compulsion being the thing that keeps us caught in the trap.